All right, well, while we are setting up the computer, let me touch on some important things that are coming up. Monday, you have exam one. I encourage you to take the exam seriously. We have an in-class review for the exam on Friday. There is a student tutor-led review tomorrow night. I've already sent the link around via announcements. Yes.
Is test online or?
The test will be, the correct answer is both. So I expect you all to come here and I'll take attendance. But because of COVID rules, I won't give you a paper test. You will bring your device and take it online from this room, unless you have an accommodation of some sort. I should say a couple things about the test. About a third of my students who have taken this exam in the past are very upset with their grades. I tell you this because one of the deceptive things about the first month of this class is this. All of the skills we've gone over feel very straightforward, right? But they're the sort of things you have to learn to mastery to do well on the exam. So if you're expecting an A, you need to have, everything down, 98, 99% each. If you only kind of have each skill down, what happens is something like this. On the first section, so let's say you only have the translation skill about 80% down. 80% doesn't feel like you should worry too much. But the translation section, you'll get an 80 on the translation section. But that won't be the only section. There will also be a do the STAR test for validity section. But first you have to translate. So you mistranslate 20% of those. So you're down 20, now you're at an 80 for that section. But then you only know the STAR test like 80%. And then you get another 20% wrong. Now in that section, you get like a 65. Then there'll be like another section, which might be find the conclusion. So again, these sort of skills are cumulative. If you only 80% know the translate skill, you'll mistranslate 20%, and you'll be at an 80 at that stage. And then you have to do a STAR test to do the find the conclusion thing. So you might get, another chunk wrong because of that. So now you're at a 65 for that section. And then you only 80% know the find the conclusion skill, and you're down to like a 50 on that section. So as I've said before, it's not good enough to kind of know these skills or even mostly know them. 80% is not bad for most things. But because the skills sort of build on each other, you have to have them to mastery. You want 98, 99, 100%. So if you only 80% have each of the skills, you'll get a D on the exam, and you'll be very upset because you think you're normally a B student, which is what you'd normally think of for like an 80%. So my point is, although the skills feel not that challenging individually, the accumulative effect of using these skills is hard. It's like a language or a math. If you only kind of learn the basic skills, the additional skills that build on them will come back to bite you. I tell you this because I want you to do well. I don't get an extra commission for failing students. Wouldn't that be weird? So yeah. All right, any logistical questions? I mean, we'll have a review on, we'll have our review on Friday. So it is important on Friday to come with questions. If you have questions, there's every reason for you to bring them with you on Friday, and no reason not to bring them. All right, what's the deal with Turning Point here? Why are we not cooperating? All right. All right, to be blunt, I think this computer is a virus or it has way too much data on it or something, because this computer operates much slower than every other computer I use at this university.
Used an awful lot, so.
I mean, that might be it. So today we're going to cover idiomatic arguments. Eventually my thing will boot up. Idiomatic arguments are, essentially what idiomatic arguments are is this. Idiomatic arguments are real life English language arguments. And in truth, they're even more complex than the sort of standard sample problems, exercises we've been giving you. So we're going to give you some information on how to use the tools of logic for dealing with these more subtle, harder English language arguments. Well, let me ask, how did the reading go? How did the exercises go? Any sort of initial questions or thoughts on it?
I think one thing that kept striking me was, again, the translation, especially since these were a lot bigger, or longer in a sense than the previous thing.
Good, yeah. So that translate skill is still important, and some of them were intentionally giving you some even harder level translations to do. So yeah, that's not your imagination. All right, well, so here's how idiomatic arguments work. In real life, if you are watching a political debate or reading a newspaper editorial or subjected to a commercial on the TV, often these real life arguments don't follow the patterns that we've taught you to expect so far. Some of the ways that the patterns might be different. The point that the argument is trying to make might not be just at the end of the argument. Often it appears at the beginning of the argument instead. It can even appear in the middle of the argument. If the person designing the argument is following the normal patterns taught in journalism and English, well, let me ask you, where's the conclusion of the argument supposed to appear if you're writing a research paper or doing a journalistic argument? I mean, surely you've had English 123 or 223. Where's your conclusion supposed to appear?
At the end.
It's supposed to appear at the end, but not only at the end. Where else is it supposed to appear? Also at the beginning. And also it's kind of referred to along the way. I mean, that's what we teach you. You know, the conclusion to an argumentative paper is your thesis statement, which is supposed to appear very early on. So if you follow sort of the standard argument method that's taught in our culture in written language, the conclusion might appear first and last. That's called a redundant claim. And part of the trick is realizing, oh, I only have to translate that once. But so all that to say, the sample problems we've been giving you so far, the exercises have been kind of neater and tidier than real life English idiomatic arguments. Yet another way that real life arguments can be different is this. Sometimes we don't state important premises. So here, let me give you an example. The week before every major political election, you will always see commercials. And these commercials sound something like this, with ominous music. Don't vote for this candidate. This candidate is crazy. If you translate and star that argument will come up as invalid. But not because it's a bad argument, but because that argument has an implicit, unstated premise. The implicit, unstated premise that everyone's supposed to know is we don't want to vote for crazy. And there's other versions of that. Don't vote for this candidate, they'll destroy the economy. If you translate and test that for validity, it will be invalid. But not because it's a bad argument, but because they didn't explicitly state what's kind of obvious. We don't want a president who's going to destroy the economy. Also with advertisements. Buy our car, it's cheaper. That's a reasonable argument. I go for that argument. But you know what? Again, you need to add an implicit premise. The implicit premise is you want to buy something that's affordable or cheaper. So often you need to add implicit premises. All right. So when we approach idiomatic arguments, there are three important steps. There are three important steps. Step one, find the conclusion. The conclusion is most often last, as we've been doing in our exercises to this point, but it doesn't have to be last. Start by looking for it at the end, and if you're not sure if that's it, then look at the very beginning and look at the whole thing. What makes the conclusion is that the conclusion is the claim that the argument tries to find evidence for. So what makes the conclusion isn't that it appears last, isn't that it appears first, isn't that it has an exclamation point. What makes the conclusion is that it is the claim that the argument is trying to provide evidence for. A well-formed argument will use premises that are more plausible, that people tend to be more certain in order to prove a conclusion that is more controversial. So here's how that principle works. If I try to prove a conclusion that the premises are premises that you don't believe or that you think are just as dubious or more dubious than the conclusion, then my argument will fail to convince anybody. This is a very common mistake in arguments, is people think that because they believe a premise, they suspect you will believe the premise. And that's not how persuasion works. If I want to persuade you, I need to figure you out well enough to figure out what sorts of premises you might believe. So a sort of mature, convincing argument will tend to use premises that are more objective or accessible to all of you to prove something more controversial. So here, let's do this with real life. On Sunday, I hear there's some sort of sports thing going on. What's this thing on Sunday that's going on?
I have no clue.
You have no clue? All right. On Sunday is the Super Bowl. Does anyone have an opinion about the Super Bowl? Who's going to win the Super Bowl? The Chiefs. So the Super Bowl this Sunday is between Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the idea that the Chiefs are going to win is a controversial idea. We don't really know. So that's going to, so the idea that the Chiefs are going to win is going to be our controversial conclusion. Persuade me that the Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl. Okay, good. So he makes a claim, and we can sort of use empirical data that, he throws for more touchdowns, he throws for more yards. I don't really know exactly which pieces of data, but yeah, I mean, there's data to suggest that this is true. What else? Okay, yeah, we can kind of prove that statistically too. Okay, I mean, maybe in terms of wins and losses, yeah, the Buccaneers historically have not had an incredible coaching record. This is true. So the point here isn't anything about the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buccaneers. The point is the idea of who's going to win the Super Bowl. That claim is sort of controversial. We don't know that. Our claim about that's going to be the conclusion. The proper persuasive way to try to argue for that is to use data premises that I can't disagree with. By the way, Vegas agrees with you, but I never bet against Tom Brady. Love him or hate him, I would recommend never betting against him. All right, so find the conclusion. Look at the final claim. Look at the first claim. Look at which claim is most controversial. That is often the conclusion. And most importantly, look for what the point is. Look for what the claim is that the argument is trying to prove. That's the definition of the conclusion. And of course, here is the easiest tip, and I saved the easiest tip for last. Look at the conclusion indicators in section 2.7. The conclusion indicators include hence, thus, so, therefore, it must be, it can't be, this proves, this shows, ergo. These are all conclusion indicators. Now, that's the easiest tip. That being said, not every argument uses conclusion indicators. But where you have one, it makes your life a lot easier. So step one, find the conclusion. Step two, find the premises. Now again, the premises are the evidence. The reasons in the argument. In the kind of exercises we do, the premises tend to be everything else. Now, in real life arguments, there's often a lot of things that are neither conclusions or premises or redundant. But for the sake of this class, generally the premises are going to be everything else. And most usefully, like the conclusion indicators, we have a list of premise indicators. Things like because, for, since, after all, I assume that, as we know, for these reasons. These are all premise indicators. Finally, step 3. Add any implicit premises. Anytime you have a gap in an argument, it usually means that you have an implicit premise. The easiest way to spot an implicit premise is this. If you have translated the argument into logic, if there are two terms that only occur once, this almost always indicates an implicit premise. Something that sort of goes without saying that wasn't explicitly stated. Just like that negative political commercial, don't vote for this guy, he will destroy the economy. You need to add the premise, you shouldn't vote for people who will destroy the economy. buy our tools, our tools cost less. Leaves out the implicit claim, you should buy things that cost less. Or, yeah. So again, add any implicit premises. The biggest indicator, look for two terms used only once. So those are the three key steps to using in logic for to examine an idiomatic argument. Let's look at some of the problems together. Let's look at number 2 in section 2.7a. Number 2 says, you couldn't have studied. The evidence for this is that you got an F- on the test. What do we do first? Find the conclusion. What's the conclusion? No, that's actually not the conclusion. How do I know that that's not the conclusion? The reason that's not the conclusion is because it uses this phrase, the evidence for this. And when you say something is the evidence, that means it must be a premise. So first thing we do is we find the conclusion. The conclusion is you couldn't have studied. Then we find the premise. The evidence for this is that you got an F-. It has that nice premise indicator. Let me translate each of these. The conclusion is going to be lowercase u is not capital S. Lowercase u is capital F. All right. So the premise is you got an F-. The conclusion is you are not the group of people who studied. All right. What's wrong with this argument? What do we need?
You need another premise.
You need another premise. Why?
Because U is not S doesn't follow from U.
All right. So one thing, if I did the STAR test on this, it would fail the STAR test. But that doesn't always guarantee that, that there's a missing premise. What guarantees that there's a missing premise is that we have a capital F used only once, and we have a capital S used only once. And that means we need to supply another premise using the F and the S. So we're going to need a capital F, we're going to need a capital S. Any idea what this premise should be? No, F is F. No one who gets an F is somebody who has studied. How'd you know?
Because in the conclusion it's a negative, so the second premise has to be a negative.
Good, yeah. So the negative is, yeah. And if you try to sum as not, you wouldn't get a valid argument. And if you're adding an implicit premise, you always want to try to add something that will make it a valid argument. So let's do the STAR test, and that's valid. All right. Well, that's just a sample. Let's open it up, and why don't you tell me which ones you struggled with? Which ones did? Yes. Three. All right. God can't condemn agnostics for non-belief, for God is all good. Anyone who is all good respects intellectual honesty, and no one who does this condemns agnostics for non-belief. All right, first thing we do is we find the conclusion. The conclusion turns out to be that first sentence, that God can't condemn agnostics for non-belief. The way we determine that's the conclusion is actually because if you look at that second sentence, it starts with for, and for is a premise indicator. So the first sentence is the conclusion. The second sentence is the premises. One of the tricky things about this second statement, the second sentence is actually multiple premises in one statement. All right, so conclusion, little g, referring to God, no disrespect, is not capital C. God is not in the group of people who can condemn agnostics for non-belief. All right, then the rest is premises. Little g is capital G, all good. Then all capital G is capital R, a respecter of intellectual honesty, and no capital R is capital C. Pretty sure that's the right translation. Then we take a look, we ask, are there any missing premises? And I'm going to go with no, because everything occurs exactly twice. Then we distribute star. Every capital letter start exactly once, exactly one on the right. It's valid. So can I ask where your challenge with that one was?
Well, I think when I started, I was just confused about like the conclusion being at the beginning.
Good. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the challenge here is just making sure you've got the conclusion down cold. You know, identifying which one's the conclusion. So remember, on the test, remember with idiomatic arguments, the conclusion doesn't have to be the last thing. Yes, sir. Number 9. Key number 9. Not all the transistors in your radio can be silicon. After all, every transistor that works well at high temperatures is silicon, and yet not all the transistors in your radio work well at high temperatures. All right, so again, here is yet another one where when we try to spot the conclusion will be the first sentence, but there will be no indicator on the conclusion itself that lets us know this. The giveaway will be that the other claims are flagged with premise indicators. So the after all is a premise indicator. So the conclusion is not all of the transistors in your radio can be silicon. Not all, I think is a sum is not pattern. Yes, not all, some is not. Some of the capital T transistors in your radio are not silicon. After all capital W being transistors that work well at high temperatures, is capital S. And yet, again, not all. And yet not all the T transistors in your radio work well at high temperatures. All right, I check for implicit premises, and there are no implicit premises because every term appears exactly twice. But this is going to turn out to be invalid, I think. Oh, all right, I was wrong. That's all right. No, that is valid. Oh, wait, yeah, there you go. I knew it didn't sound right. Yeah, the S never gets starred and there are 2 stars on the W. So there you go. Not valid. I knew that sounded wrong. Yes, 13.
Real quick, I had a question on that one.
Sure.
I put, for the T, and I actually put an R for that, but I put that in the lowercase because it's your radio, one specific, instead of the general.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I understand why you did that.
Yeah.
Capital R would have been fine, but remember the category isn't your radio. The category is transistors in your radio, and there are multiple transistors in the radio. And that's what makes this argument invalid is the use of the words some instead of universal terms down here. So if this had been, yeah, well, we needed to start the S and we need to get one off of W. Anyway, there's problems in that argument. All right, so I'm sorry, what number were we on? 13. Only pure studies in form have true artistic worth. This proves that a thing doesn't have true artistic worth unless it's abstract. For it's false that there's something that's abstract, but that isn't a pure study in form. Wow, that's abstract even by my standards. All right, first thing we do is find the conclusion, and the conclusion is in the weirdest place yet. The conclusion is the first clause of the second statement. The conclusion is going to be, this proves that a thing doesn't have true artistic worth unless it's abstract. All right, so 13, this proves that a thing, so all things with true artistic worth, I don't want to use A there because I'm going to want to use A for the other thing. All things with capital T, true artistic worth, are abstract. All capital T is capital A, abstract. So that's going to be the conclusion. The other things are going to be premises. So we start with the first sentence. Only pure studies in form have true artistic worth. Now, only is an all statement, but only changes, only introduces the second term. So that's going to be capital P for the second term because of only. Thank you for making life hard. And the first half is capital T. Wait. Right, no, that's right, true artistic worth. All right, so that's the first premise. The second sentence, the first big clause, is already translated. It's false that there's something that's abstract, but isn't a pure study in form. Again, that is a negate. It's false that it's false that there's something that's abstract, but isn't a pure study in form. So that is a universal statement. That's going to be a universal, I think that's an all. If that doesn't work, let me double check and try it with you now. All capital A, things that are abstract, is capital P. All things that are abstract are pure studies in form. That's actually what that complicated statement seems to say. So let's try this. No, that's a no. Let me try that. No, that's not going to work either. All right, well, if I'm translating it properly, it's going to be invalid. It's false. There's something that's not. Let me just look up the exact pattern to make sure I've got this right. False. Yeah, I am translating it properly. So this is going to turn out to be invalid. That one was hard. I agree. Yes?
For that one, if the first T and P were switched, it would be wrong. Is that ever set up, just everything is accepted?
If the T and the P and the first one are switched, yeah, that would be wrong because that's the one with the only, and the only introduces the second term. So that's why I told you to star and underline the only, because that always messes things up. So only always introduces the second term of an all statement. Yes? 20. Only things true by linguistic convention are necessary truths. This shows that God exists can't be a necessary truth. After all, existent claims aren't true by linguistic convention. All right, so we need to find the conclusion. What's the conclusion? Who can help me out? Which one, where's the conclusion in this? Number 20. Yes?
It shows that God exists can't be necessary truth.
Good. Yeah, the second statement, this shows that is a conclusion indicator. So, this shows that, so this is going to be little g. Little g here isn't God. Little g here is the claim that God exists. Little g is not capital N, a necessary truth. All right, then the other two sentences are premises. Only things true by linguistic convention are necessary truths. Now, only introduces the second term here, so it's going to be all blank is L, meaning things that are true by linguistic convention. All necessary truths are L. That's going to be the first premise. And the third statement is the second premise. Existence claims are not true by linguistic convention. All right, now they put the aren't in the middle, but that makes it a no statement. No, no E, existent claim, is capital L. Wait, did I get that right? No existence claim is something true by linguistic convention. All right, now I look at this, I've translated everything, but there's something weird. What's the weird thing?
It's all good.
Right, there's only one little g, and there's also only one capital E, and that means that we need another premise, that's right. So we're going to need a premise with little g and capital E. The third premise is going to be the claim that God exists is an existence claim. All right, after we've got that, then we distribute star, and it's valid. Yes? Number 6. Not all human concepts can be derived from sense experience. My reason for saying this is the idea of self-contradicts is a human concept, but isn't derived from sense experience. All right, what do we do first? Find the conclusion. Can somebody help me find the conclusion? Where is the conclusion here hiding? Well, this is a case where we have a premise indicator on the second sentence. So that means that the conclusion has to be the first sentence. So the first sentence is not all human concepts can be derived from sense experience. So that is a sum. Capital H is not. Capital D, some human concepts are not derived from sense experience. My reason for saying this, that's again the premise indicator. My reason for saying this is that the idea of self-contradictory, lowercase I, is the idea of self-contradictory is a capital H, is a human concept, but isn't derived from sense experience. Now that last part of the second sentence is another premise. But what you have to do is you have to, it doesn't repeat what the second half there is that the idea of self-contradictory is a human concept, but the idea of self-contradictory isn't derived from sense experience. So what's confusing there is that you have to reuse the lowercase I standing for the idea of the self-contradictory, despite the fact that it's not explicitly repeated there. So once you've got the idea of self-contradictory, is not D. And then we distribute star. That's good. Does that make sense? Was the tricky part translating that second premise where they didn't give you the first term, you had to reuse it from the earlier part, or was the finding the conclusion the hard part?
I think I was confused by my reason for saying this. I didn't realize that was just an indicator and not part of it. So what would that be?
Good, yeah. No, that's fair. I mean, yeah, so sometimes there are phrases in the sentence that don't translate. They're just indicators, and in real life, there's even more stuff that just doesn't translate as anything. They're either illustrations or redundant or flowery rhetoric, and it adds nothing to the truth value of the argument. It's trying to engage you emotionally, to manipulate you. Yes, sir. 19. Let's see how we're doing on time. Yeah, we can do 19. Iron objects conduct electricity. We know this from what we learned last week, namely that iron objects are metallic and that nothing conducts electricity unless it's metallic. Okay, so we find the conclusion first. There's no conclusion indicators, but we do have some nice premise indicators, and then by process of elimination, we realize what the conclusion is. We know this from starting the second sentence is the premise indicator, so the conclusion must be iron objects conduct electricity. So the conclusion is all capital I is capital C. All iron objects are things that conduct electricity. We know this from what we learned last week, namely, all right, so that's all an introduction and premise indicator. Iron objects are metallic. All capital I is capital M. Iron objects are metallic. And nothing conducts electricity unless it's metallic. All things that conduct electricity is metallic. Let me double check that. Nothing unless, I'm 90% sure nothing unless is an all pattern. Yeah, nothing unless is an all pattern. So then we distribute, we star, and that's not valid because we didn't get a star on the M. Okay? All right, listen, for Friday, to get the most out of this review, you need to bring your questions to me. So bring your questions to me. I will give you some sample problems to talk about. But the important thing is, you bring your questions to me. And don't forget, there is a student tutor-led review tomorrow night. I recommend that you go to both that as well as my review. Thank you very much. Good luck to you. Have a happy Wednesday. Thank you very much. Take care.